What was that? What was that? Oh my God, did you hear that? What was that noise? Did you hear that noise? Oh my God, what was that? What was that? What was that noise? Oh my God. Oh my God, what was that? Oh my God. Oh my God, get away from me.
Hello, my fear seekers. I'm your fear master. Fear on the Route 66 is not just about the tales of the supernatural. It's the unsettling feeling that washes over you as you realize you're not alone, that the past is always present, and that the spirits of those who traveled before you are still wandering, searching for something they lost along the way. So as you journey down this haunted highway, keep your eyes peeled and your senses sharp. The road ahead is dark and full of terrors, and fear is the true ghost that haunts Route 66. Tonight, I bring you 6 stories that will make you think twice about your next road trip along this iconic highway. So buckle up and enjoy the ride. What could possibly go wrong? Ghosts of Oatman, Arizona. Oatman, Arizona, is a quirky little town that seems frozen in time. Nestled along Route 66, it's a place where the Old West still lingers, with its wooden sidewalks, rustic saloons, and burros roaming the streets. But it wasn't the town's charming facade that drew me there. It was the stories of ghosts that haunt its abandoned buildings. I arrived in Oatman late one afternoon, eager to explore and perhaps experience the supernatural for myself. I checked into an old hotel, rumored to be one of the most haunted places in town. The receptionist, an older woman with a knowing smile, handed me my key and said, "If you're lucky, you might get a visit from one of our resident spirits." I chuckled nervously and made my way to my room. The air was thick with history, and I could almost hear the whispers of the past. The hotel had an old-world charm, with creaky wooden floors and vintage decor. As I unpacked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I told myself it was just my imagination, stirred by the receptionist's comment. That evening, as the sun set and the town grew quiet, I ventured out to explore. The streets were eerily empty, save for the occasional bray of a burro. The rustic buildings cast long shadows in the dim light, and the air was filled with a sense of anticipation. I wandered into the old Oatman Hotel, a place teeming with ghost stories. As I stood in the dimly lit lobby, I felt a sudden chill. The air grew heavy, and I had the distinct feeling that I wasn't alone. I turned to see a figure standing at the top of the staircase. It was a man, dressed in old-fashioned mining attire. He looked at me with hollow eyes, and then, as quickly as he had appeared, he vanished. My heart raced as I tried to make sense of what I had just seen. The encounter left me shaken, and I decided to learn more about the ghosts of Oatman. The next day, I met with a local historian named Jack, who was well-versed in the town's haunted past. Jack was a friendly man with a passion for Oatman's history. He had lived there his entire life and had countless stories to tell. Many miners lost their lives in the mines around here, he explained. Their spirits are said to linger, haunting the places they once knew. Jack took me on a tour of the town's most haunted sites, sharing stories of ghostly apparitions and strange occurrences. One tale that stood out was about a miner named William, who died in a cave-in. His spirit is said to roam the town, looking for his lost companions. According to Jack, William's ghost had been seen wandering the streets at night, his lantern casting an eerie glow. As we walked through the town, Jack pointed out various buildings with haunted reputations. The Oatman Hotel, where I had seen the ghost, was just one of many. There was also the old saloon, where patrons had reported seeing phantom card players, and the abandoned mine shaft, where strange noises and lights had been observed. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. As I lay in bed, I heard the faint sound of footsteps in the hallway. I got up to investigate, but the corridor was empty. Returning to my room, I noticed a cold spot near the window, where the air seemed to crackle with energy. It felt as though someone, or something, was standing right beside me. I spent several days in Oatman, each day uncovering more eerie tales and experiencing strange phenomena. Lights flickering, doors creaking open by themselves, and cold drafts that seemed to come from nowhere. The townsfolk were accustomed to these occurrences, often shrugging them off with a knowing smile. One evening, as I sat in a local saloon, I struck up a conversation with an old prospector named Bill. He was a grizzled man with a weathered face, and he had lived in Oatman for decades. Over a pint of beer, he shared his own encounters with the spirits of Oatman. "You see things out here that you can't explain," he said, taking a swig of his drink. "The past never really leaves this place." Bill recounted a particularly chilling story about a ghostly figure that appeared in his cabin one night. "I woke up to find a man standing at the foot of my bed," he recounted. "He looked like a miner from the old days. He didn't say anything, just stared at me for a long moment before fading away. I couldn't sleep for days after that." Bill's story sent shivers down my spine. It was clear that the spirits of Oatman were not just figments of the imagination. They were real, and their presence was felt by many. I decided to spend more time exploring the town, hoping to uncover more of its ghostly secrets. The following night, I joined a ghost tour led by a local guide named Sarah. The tour was a popular attraction, drawing both tourists and paranormal enthusiasts. Sarah was an enthusiastic storyteller, and she had a knack for bringing the haunted history of Oatman to life. As we walked through the darkened streets, Sarah recounted tales of haunted buildings and ghostly encounters. We visited the old schoolhouse, where the ghost of a young girl had been seen playing in the yard. We explored the abandoned jail, where prisoners had reported seeing shadowy figures in their cells. The highlight of the tour was the visit to the mine shaft, where the spirit of William was said to linger. As we descended into the dark, narrow tunnel, the air grew colder, and the sense of unease intensified. Sarah paused at a spot where the ground had caved in, marking the place of William's tragic death. "Many people have reported seeing William's ghost here," Sarah said, her voice echoing in the darkness. "They see his lantern flickering in the distance, and sometimes they hear his voice calling out for help." We stood in silence for a moment, listening to the stillness of the mine. Suddenly, I heard a faint whisper, like someone calling my name. The sound sent chills down my spine, and I felt a cold breeze brush past me. It was as if William's spirit was reaching out, trying to make contact. The tour ended at the Oatman Hotel, where I had first encountered the ghostly miner. As we stood in the dimly lit lobby, I felt the same chill I had felt on my first night. The air grew heavy, and the sense of being watched returned. Sarah concluded the tour with a final story about the hotel's haunted history. "This place has seen its share of tragedy," she said. "From miners who met untimely deaths to guests who never checked out. The spirits of Oatman are here to stay." As my time in Oatman came to an end, I reflected on the experiences I'd had. The town's haunted history had come alive in ways I could never have imagined. The spirits of Oatman, those restless souls of the past, had made their presence known. Driving away from Oatman, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see one of those ghostly figures watching me go. The town had left an indelible mark on me, a reminder that the past is never truly gone, and that sometimes the spirits of those who came before us still walk among us. Oatman had given me more than just ghost stories. It had given me a connection to history, a sense of the lives that had once thrived in this quirky little town. The ghosts of Oatman were not just echoes of the past. They were a part of the town's fabric, a reminder of the enduring spirit of those who had lived, worked, and died in this rugged corner of Arizona. As I continued my journey along Route 66, I carried with me the memories of Oatman and its spectral inhabitants. The experience had deepened my appreciation for the stories that make up our history and the spirits that keep those stories alive. The ghosts of Oatman, Arizona, would forever haunt my thoughts, a testament to the town's enduring mystery and charm. Overtoun Bridge, the ghostly mystery. Overtoun Bridge, located near Dumbarton, Scotland, is a picturesque structure spanning a deep gorge. But despite its serene appearance, the bridge is known for a chilling phenomenon: dogs leaping to their deaths for no apparent reason. This macabre legend has earned it the nickname the Dog Suicide Bridge. Intrigued by the stories, I decided to visit and uncover the truth behind the eerie occurrences. I arrived at Overtoun Bridge on a misty morning, the fog hanging low over the landscape. The bridge itself was a beautiful example of 19th century architecture, its stone arches gracefully spanning the gorge below. But the peaceful setting belied the dark reputation that had drawn me here. As I walked across the bridge, I couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. The air was heavy, and the silence was broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. I leaned over the edge, peering into the dense undergrowth far below. It was easy to see how a fall from such a height could be fatal. I met with a local historian named Margaret, who had agreed to show me around and share the history of the bridge. She was an elderly woman with a sharp mind and a wealth of knowledge about the area. Overtoun Bridge was built in 1895, she explained. But it's not just the architecture that makes it famous. For decades, people have reported dogs jumping from this bridge, often to their deaths. It's a tragic mystery that has baffled experts and locals alike. Margaret led me to the site of many of these tragic incidents. As we stood there, she recounted some of the most disturbing stories. Dogs will suddenly become agitated, running towards the edge and leaping off without hesitation. It's as if they're drawn by some unseen force. I shuddered at the thought. Has anyone ever found an explanation? There are many theories, Margaret replied. Some believe it's due to the scent of mink in the underbrush, which drives the dogs into a frenzy. Others think it's related to the unique acoustics of the bridge, which might confuse the animals. And then there are those who believe it's something more sinister. Margaret's mention of sinister forces piqued my interest. What do you mean? There's a legend, she said, lowering her voice, that Overtoun Bridge is a thin place, a location where the veil between our world and the spirit world is thinner. Some say the dogs are sensing spirits or being influenced by otherworldly presences. That evening, I decided to stay in a nearby bed and breakfast, hoping to gather more insights from the locals. Over dinner, I struck up a conversation with the owner, a middle-aged man named David. Everyone around here knows about the bridge, David said, shaking his head. I've heard all sorts of stories. Some say they've seen ghostly figures near the bridge. Others have felt a sudden chill or heard whispers in the wind. I pressed him for more details, and he shared a personal experience. A few years ago, my wife and I were walking our dog near the bridge. Our dog, Max, was always well-behaved, but that day he started acting strangely. He pulled on the leash, barking and growling at something we couldn't see. It was as if he was in a trance. We had to drag him away from the edge. I've never seen him act like that before or since. David's story added a new layer to the mystery. I decided to visit the bridge again at night, hoping to experience something for myself. Armed with a flashlight and a sense of trepidation, I made my way back to Overtoun Bridge under the cover of darkness. The bridge was eerily quiet, the only sound the distant hoot of an owl. As I walked across, the flashlight beam cut through the mist, casting long shadows on the stone walls. I reached the center of the bridge and stopped, listening to the silence. Suddenly, I felt a chill run down my spine. The air grew colder, and I sensed a presence behind me. I turned, but there was no one there. My heart pounded as I scanned the area with the flashlight. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a figure, a pale, ghostly shape standing at the edge of the bridge. I froze, unable to move. The figure seemed to beckon, its form wavering in the mist. I felt a strange compulsion to move closer, but I fought the urge. Instead, I called out, "Who are you?" The figure remained silent, slowly fading into the fog. The chill in the air dissipated, leaving me shaken but determined to find answers. I spent the rest of the night researching in my room, trying to piece together the puzzle of Overtoun Bridge. In the following days, I spoke with more locals and experts, gathering accounts of strange phenomena and tragic events. The stories were consistent: dogs acting out of character, ghostly sightings, and an overwhelming sense of unease. Despite the many theories, there was no definitive explanation. The bridge's history, combined with the inexplicable behavior of the dogs, suggested something more than mere coincidence. Whether it was a natural phenomenon or a supernatural presence, Overtoun Bridge remained a place of mystery and tragedy. As I left Scotland, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had only scratched the surface of the bridge's secrets. The ghostly figure and the eerie experiences had left a lasting impression. Overtoun Bridge was more than just a tragic location. It was a place where the past and present intertwined, a reminder that some mysteries might never be fully understood. My journey along Route 66 had taken me to many haunted and historic places, but the legend of Overtoun Bridge was one that would stay with me forever. It was a haunting tale of unexplained phenomena, a story that blended history, tragedy, and the supernatural in a way that left me both fascinated and deeply unsettled. Spirits of Amboy Gas Station. The Amboy gas station in California, along the desolate stretch of Route 66, is more than just an abandoned relic of the past. It's a place where the present and the supernatural intersect in eerie and inexplicable ways. My journey there was driven by curiosity and a love for ghost stories, but what I experienced was beyond anything I could have imagined. I arrived in Amboy late in the afternoon, the sun casting long shadows over the empty landscape. The gas station stood alone, a solitary sentinel in the vast desert. Its weathered sign creaked in the wind, and the old pumps, now rusted and unused, seemed to whisper secrets of days gone by. I parked my car and stepped out, the crunch of gravel underfoot the only sound in the stillness. The air was thick with a sense of abandonment and decay, but also something else, an energy that made my skin tingle. I walked around the station, taking in the dilapidated buildings and the silence that seemed almost unnatural. As I explored, I felt a sudden chill, despite the heat of the day. I turned to see a figure standing by the old pumps. It was a man, dressed in dusty work clothes, staring at me with hollow eyes. My heart skipped a beat, but when I blinked, he was gone. I shook my head, trying to rationalize what I had seen. Maybe it was a trick of the light, or my imagination running wild. But the feeling of being watched persisted. I decided to investigate further, hoping to find some clue about the station's haunted reputation. I entered the main building, the door creaking ominously as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was musty, and the remnants of old merchandise littered the shelves. I moved through the rooms, my flashlight casting eerie shadows on the walls. In the back room, I found an old logbook, the pages yellowed and brittle. Flipping through it, I discovered entries dating back decades, detailing the daily operations of the station. As I read, I noticed several entries mentioning strange occurrences, lights flickering, tools moving on their own, and the sound of footsteps when no one was around. One entry in particular caught my eye. It described a tragic accident in which a worker was killed when a car exploded at the pump. The entry was dated June 12, 1968. I felt a chill run down my spine. The description matched the figure I had seen earlier. Could it be that his spirit was still lingering here, unable to move on? Determined to uncover more, I spent the night in my car, parked near the station. As darkness fell, the eerie atmosphere intensified. The wind howled through the empty buildings, and shadows danced in the moonlight. Around midnight, I heard a faint tapping sound, like metal on metal. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the car, the beam cutting through the darkness. The tapping grew louder as I approached the old pump where I had seen the figure. Suddenly, the air around me grew icy cold, and I saw him again. The worker, standing by the pump, looking at me with eyes full of sorrow. This time I didn't look away. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't respond, just stared at me for a long moment before disappearing once again. The coldness lingered, and I felt a deep sense of sadness and loss. It was as if the spirit was trying to communicate, to tell me something. The next day, I visited the local library to see if I could find more information about the accident. The librarian, a woman in her 60s, listened to my story with interest. "You're not the first to see him," she said. "Many people have reported sightings at the old gas station. The man you saw is believed to be Joe Turner, the worker who died in the explosion. It was a tragic accident, and his spirit has been restless ever since." I spent the next few days delving into the history of Amboy and the gas station, speaking with locals and piecing together the story of Joe Turner. I learned that he had been a well-liked member of the community, dedicated to his job and known for his friendly demeanor. His death had been a shock to everyone, and it seemed his spirit had never found peace. One evening, as I stood by the old pump where Joe had died, I spoke aloud, hoping he could hear me. "Joe, if you're here, I want you to know that people remember you. Your story isn't forgotten." As I spoke, the wind seemed to die down, and a calmness settled over the area. The cold chill that had been present during my previous encounters was gone, replaced by a sense of tranquility. It felt as though Joe's spirit had finally found some semblance of peace. But the peace was short-lived. That night, I decided to explore more of the deserted buildings around the gas station. I ventured into what used to be a small diner, now a shell of its former self. The tables and chairs were covered in dust, and the kitchen equipment was rusted and broken. As I walked through the diner, I heard a faint humming sound, like an old tune being softly sung. I followed the sound to the back of the building, where I found a small storage room. The humming stopped abruptly as I entered, and the room grew cold. I could see my breath in the air, despite the desert heat outside. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, my heart pounding, and saw a shadowy figure standing in the corner of the room. It was a woman, her face obscured by darkness. She pointed towards a corner of the room where an old photograph lay on the floor. I picked up the photograph with trembling hands. It was a picture of Joe Turner, standing with a woman who I assumed was his wife. They looked happy, smiling at the camera. I realized then that the woman's spirit was also lingering here, perhaps waiting for Joe. "Is this you?" I asked, turning towards the shadowy figure. She didn't respond, but I felt a wave of sadness wash over me. It was as if she was telling me her story through the emotions that filled the room. I placed the photograph gently back on the floor and whispered, "I'll try to help you." The figure faded, and the room grew warmer. I knew I had to do something to help these spirits find peace. The next day, I reached out to the local community and shared the story of Joe and his wife. Together, we organized a small memorial at the gas station, inviting anyone who had known the couple to come and pay their respects. On the day of the memorial, a small group gathered at the gas station. We shared stories about Joe and his wife, remembering their lives and the impact they had on the community. It was a solemn but hopeful occasion, and I felt a sense of closure begin to form. As the sun set, we placed flowers at the site of the explosion and said a few words in memory of Joe and his wife. The air was warm, and a gentle breeze rustled the flowers. It felt as though their spirits were finally at peace. That night, I decided to stay one last time at the gas station. I wanted to see if the memorial had made a difference. As I sat by the old pump, the air was calm, and the sense of unease was gone. I felt a presence, but it was comforting, as if Joe and his wife were watching over the place, finally reunited. The experience at Amboy gas station was more than just a ghost story. It was a journey of understanding and compassion. It reminded me that the spirits of the past are often seeking closure, just as we do. By acknowledging their stories and remembering their lives, we can help them find peace. As I drove away from Amboy, I felt a sense of fulfillment. The desolate gas station was no longer just a place of tragedy. It was a testament to the enduring connections that bind us all, living and dead. The spirits of Joe Turner and his wife had found their peace, and in doing so, had left an indelible mark on my heart. The haunted gas station of Amboy became more than just a stop on my journey. It became a story of remembrance and connection. I left with a deep respect for the history and the spirits that linger along Route 66. The experience reminded me that the past is never truly gone, and that the stories of those who came before us continue to echo through time. My journey along Route 66 had taken me to many haunted and historic places, but the legend of Amboy gas station was one that would stay with me forever. It was a haunting tale of unexplained phenomena, a story that blended history, tragedy, and the supernatural in a way that left me both fascinated and deeply unsettled. The haunted Rialto Theater. Route 66 is known for its rich history and charming stops, but few places have captivated me as much as the Rialto Theater in Joliet, Illinois. This grand old theater, with its ornate architecture and timeless elegance, has been a cultural hub since it opened in the 1920s. However, it's not just the performances that draw people in, it's also the ghostly tales that surround it. I arrived in Joliet on a crisp autumn afternoon, eager to explore the historic town and, of course, the famous Rialto Theater. I had read about its haunted reputation, and as a lover of the paranormal, I couldn't resist the chance to investigate. The theater loomed majestically as I approached, its grand facade a testament to the golden age of cinema. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with nostalgia. The plush red seats, the grand chandeliers, and the echoes of past performances all added to the sense of history. But there was something else, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I met with one of the theater's longtime employees, a kind man named Tom, who had worked there for over 3 decades. He was more than willing to share the ghost stories that had become part of the theater's lore. "You ever hear of Esmeralda?" he asked, a twinkle in his eye. I shook my head. "No. Who's that?" "Esmeralda was an actress in the early days of the theater," Tom explained. Legend has it she died tragically young, right here in the theater. Some say she fell from the balcony during a performance. Others say she took her own life. Either way, her spirit is said to haunt this place. Tom led me to the balcony where Esmeralda supposedly met her end. As I stood there, looking out over the empty seats, I felt a sudden chill. The air seemed to crackle with energy, and I could almost hear the faint sound of a woman singing. It was as if the theater itself was alive with the echoes of the past. People have reported seeing her, Tom continued. A figure in a long, flowing dress, wandering the halls or appearing in the balconies. Lights flicker, doors slam, and sometimes you can hear her singing. She was known for her beautiful voice, you know. That evening, I attended a performance at the Rialto. The show was fantastic, but I couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. As the final act concluded and the audience applauded, I scanned the balconies, half expecting to see a ghostly figure watching from above. After the show, the theater emptied out, leaving me and a few staff members behind. I had arranged to stay late and explore, hoping to catch a glimpse of Esmeralda or any other spectral inhabitants. Tom accompanied me, sharing more stories as we wandered through the dimly lit corridors and backstage areas. As we stood on the stage, the house lights dimmed, and the theater fell into an eerie silence. Tom and I listened intently, straining to hear any sounds that might indicate a ghostly presence. Suddenly, there was a faint humming sound, like someone singing softly. The hair on my arm stood on end. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. Tom nodded, his expression serious. "That's her. That's Esmeralda." We followed the sound, which seemed to lead us to one of the dressing rooms. The door was slightly ajar, and a cold draft seeped through. As we pushed the door open, the humming stopped abruptly, leaving us in a heavy silence. The room was empty, but the air felt charged with an unseen presence. "I've never seen her myself," Tom said, his voice hushed. "But I've felt her, just like this. She's here." I spent the rest of the night in the theater, experiencing small, inexplicable events, lights flickering, a door creaking open by itself, the sound of footsteps echoing in the empty hallways. By the time the first light of dawn broke through, I felt a mix of exhilaration and exhaustion. The Rialto Theater had lived up to its haunted reputation. While I didn't see Esmeralda with my own eyes, the experiences I had were enough to convince me that something otherworldly lingered within those walls. The spirits of the past, the echoes of performances long gone, and the tragic tales woven into the fabric of the theater made it a place where history and the supernatural coexisted. My curiosity piqued. I returned to the Rialto the next day to delve deeper into the history of Esmeralda. I headed to the local library, where I met with a librarian named Margaret. She had a wealth of knowledge about Joliet's history and was more than willing to help me uncover the truth. Esmeralda was indeed a real person, Margaret confirmed as she pulled out an old newspaper article. She was a rising star in the 1920s, known for her incredible voice and captivating stage presence. But her life was tragically cut short. Margaret handed me the article, and I read about the night Esmeralda died. It was during a sold-out performance, and the theater was packed. Witnesses reported seeing her step out onto the balcony, where she suddenly fell to her death. The cause of the fall was never determined, and rumors of foul play and heartbreak circulated in the aftermath. There were whispers that she was pushed, Margaret said quietly. Others believe she jumped because of a broken heart. She was in love with a fellow actor, but their relationship was fraught with turmoil. Armed with this new information, I returned to the Rialto that evening, determined to connect with Esmeralda's spirit. I brought along a digital recorder, hoping to capture any electronic voice phenomena, EVPs. Tom joined me, curious about what we might uncover. We settled into the balcony, the site of Esmeralda's tragic fall. The air was still, and the theater was cloaked in shadows. I turned on the recorder and began asking questions, speaking softly into the darkness. "Esmeralda, are you here with us?" I asked. "Can you tell us what happened that night?" For several minutes, there was nothing but silence. Then, faintly, we heard a whisper. It was barely audible, but it was there. We played back the recording, straining to make out the words. "Help me," the voice said. It was Esmeralda. My heart raced as I continued to ask questions, hoping for more responses. "Esmeralda, did someone hurt you? Were you pushed?" The recorder picked up another whisper, this one clearer. "No, love," the voice said. Tom and I exchanged glances, our eyes wide. It seemed that Esmeralda was communicating with us, sharing fragments of her story. We continued the session, asking about her life, her love, and her tragic end. As the night wore on, we captured more EVPs, each one providing a glimpse into Esmeralda's life and her lingering presence in the theater. She spoke of love and betrayal, of dreams unfulfilled, and of a sadness that bound her to the Rialto. The most poignant moment came when we asked if she found peace. There was a long pause, and then, softly, we heard, "Almost." I felt a deep sense of compassion for Esmeralda. She was a spirit caught between worlds, yearning for closure. I knew we had to do something to help her find peace. Tom and I decided to organize a tribute to Esmeralda, a special performance dedicated to her memory. We invited local actors and musicians to participate, recreating some of the performances she had once graced the stage with. The event drew a large crowd, and the theater was filled with an energy that seemed to breathe new life into its walls. As the performance reached its climax, I felt a presence in the balcony. I looked up and saw a faint, shimmering figure. It was Esmeralda, watching over us. Her face was serene, and for the first time, I felt that she was at peace. After the tribute, I returned to the balcony one last time. The air was warm, and the theater felt different, lighter. I turned on the recorder and spoke softly. "Esmeralda, we hope you enjoyed the tribute. We did this for you, to honor your memory." I played back the recording, and there, clear as day, was her voice. "Thank you," she said. "Goodbye." Tears filled my eyes as I realized that Esmeralda had finally found the peace she had been searching for. The haunting of the Rialto Theater had come to an end, but the memory of Esmeralda would live on in the hearts of those who had come to know her story. My experience at the Rialto Theater was more than just an exploration of the paranormal. It was a journey into the past, a connection with a spirit who had once been full of life and dreams. As I left Joliet, I carried with me a sense of fulfillment, knowing that I had helped bring closure to a soul who had been lost for so long. The haunted Rialto Theater was no longer just a place of ghostly tales. It was a place of remembrance, where history and the supernatural had intertwined to create a story that would never be forgotten. The Lady in White on Route 66. Driving alone at night on the legendary Route 66, you can't help but feel a shiver run down your spine. I've always loved the mystique of this iconic highway, but on this particular evening, my journey would become an unforgettable encounter with the supernatural. It was a cold, moonlit night as I cruised through the barren stretches of the Arizona desert. My mind drifted to the tales of Route 66, the stories that had always seemed like mere folklore. Little did I know, I was about to become part of one such tale. As I rounded a bend, my headlights illuminated a figure standing by the roadside. She was dressed in an old-fashioned white gown, her long hair cascading over her shoulders. I slowed down, wondering what she was doing out here alone at this hour. She raised her hand, thumb out, asking for a ride. I hesitated for a moment, but decided to help. After all, it's not every day you encounter a hitchhiker in the middle of nowhere. I pulled over and rolled down the window. "Do you need a ride?" I asked. She nodded silently and slipped into the passenger seat. Her presence was eerily quiet, and the chill in the air seemed to intensify. "Where are you headed?" I inquired, trying to make conversation. "Just a little further down the road," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. We drove in silence for a while. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of the wind outside. There was something unsettling about her, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I glanced over at her, but she was staring straight ahead, her expression unreadable. As we approached a small bridge, she suddenly turned to me. "Stop here," she said abruptly. I pulled over, confused. "Are you sure? There's nothing here?" "Yes," she insisted. "This is where I need to be." She got out of the car and stood by the roadside, looking out into the darkness. I watched her for a moment, then decided to continue my journey. Just as I was about to drive off, I looked back one last time. She was gone, completely vanished. I was bewildered. There was no way she could have disappeared so quickly. I got out of the car and searched the area, calling out for her, but there was no trace. It was as if she had never been there. I got back in my car, my heart pounding. I continued driving, but the encounter left me shaken. When I finally reached the next town, I stopped at a diner to gather my thoughts. I told the waitress about the woman in white. She listened, her eyes widening. "You saw her?" she asked, her voice hushed. "The lady in white?" I nodded. "Who is she?" The waitress leaned in, lowering her voice. "There's a legend about a woman who died in a car accident on that bridge many years ago. People say her spirit still haunts the road, looking for a ride. Some say she's searching for her lost love. Others believe she's trying to find her way home. But everyone who sees her, they say she disappears without a trace." A chill ran down my spine. I had become part of the legend of Route 66. The encounter with the lady in white was something I would never forget, a ghostly reminder of the mysterious and eerie charm that this historic highway holds. Over the following days, I couldn't shake the memory of that night. I kept replaying the scene in my mind, wondering if there was any way to explain what I had experienced. I decided to return to the bridge where I had dropped her off, hoping to find some clue that might shed light on the mystery. It was another cold night when I returned to the spot. I parked my car and walked to the middle of the bridge. The moon was full, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. As I stood there, I felt the same chill in the air. The silence was almost deafening, and I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched. I called out, "Is anyone here?" My voice echoed in the stillness. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, I heard a faint whisper, so soft I could barely make it out. "Help me," it said. I spun around, my heart racing. There was no one there, but the voice had been real. It sounded like the woman I had picked up. Determined to get to the bottom of this, I decided to spend the night in my car, parked by the side of the road. The hours passed slowly. I kept my eyes on the bridge, waiting for any sign of the lady in white. Just as I was starting to doze off, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. There she was, standing in the middle of the bridge, looking just as she had that first night. I got out of the car and approached her slowly. "Who are you?" I asked. She turned to face me, her eyes filled with sadness. "I need to find him," she said. "I need to find my love." "Who is he?" I asked, stepping closer. "He promised he would wait for me," she whispered. "But I never made it. I was in an accident. I need to find him." I realized then that she was trapped, her spirit unable to move on because she was still searching for her lost love. "How can I help you?" I asked. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. "Find him for me. Tell him I'm sorry. Tell him I never stopped loving him." Before I could say anything else, she vanished again. But this time, I felt a sense of purpose. I had to help her find peace. I spent the next few days researching, trying to find any information about a woman who had died in a car accident on that bridge. It wasn't easy, but eventually I came across an old newspaper article about a young couple who had been separated by tragedy. The woman had died in a car accident on the bridge, and her fiancé had been waiting for her on the other side. I tracked down the man, who was now an elderly gentleman living in a nearby town. When I told him about my encounter with the lady in white, tears filled his eyes. "She never made it," he said, his voice breaking. "I waited for her, but she never came." I relayed her message to him, and he nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Thank you," he whispered. "I never stopped loving her either." With that, I felt a sense of peace. I knew that I had done what I could to help the lady in white find closure. As I drove away from the bridge for the last time, I felt a warmth in the air, as if her spirit had finally been set free. The Phantom Hitchhiker of Route 66. I've always been a fan of road trips. The open road, the sense of adventure, the stories waiting to be discovered. There's nothing quite like it. But my journey along Route 66 introduced me to a story I never expected to be a part of. The legend of the Phantom Hitchhiker. It was a clear, starry night as I drove through the desolate stretches of Route 66. I had been on the road for hours, and the rhythmic hum of the tires on the asphalt was almost hypnotic. The silence was only broken by the occasional coyote howl in the distance. As I drove, I noticed a figure standing by the side of the road, thumbing for a ride. I slowed down, surprised to see someone out here in the middle of nowhere. The figure was a young man, dressed in jeans and a leather jacket. He looked like he had stepped out of a different era. I pulled over and rolled down the window. "Need a ride?" I asked. "Thanks," he said, his voice calm and steady. He climbed into the passenger seat and gave me a nod. "Appreciate it." "No problem," I replied, glancing at him. "Where are you headed?" "Just a little further down the road," he said, staring straight ahead. We drove in silence for a while. There was something off about him, something that made me uneasy. He didn't talk much, just sat there quietly. I tried to make small talk, but his responses were short and to the point. As we approached a stretch of road known for its sharp curves, he suddenly turned to me. "You should be careful around here," he said, his voice serious. "A lot of accidents happen on this road." I nodded, wondering how he knew that. The curves were treacherous, and I had heard stories of crashes and fatalities in this area. But something about the way he said it gave me chills. As we continued, I noticed the temperature in the car had dropped significantly. I glanced at the dashboard, but the heater was working fine. It was as if a cold presence had settled in the car. I glanced at my passenger, but he seemed unaffected. We reached the end of the curve, and he pointed to a small turnoff ahead. "You can drop me off there," he said. I pulled over, but as soon as he opened the door, he vanished, just disappeared into thin air. My heart pounded, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I looked around, but there was no sign of him. It was as if he had never been there. Shaken, I drove to the nearest town and found a diner. I needed to talk to someone, to try to make sense of what had just happened. I told the waitress about the hitchhiker. She listened, her eyes widening. "You saw him?" she asked, her voice hushed. "Yeah," I replied. "Who is he?" She leaned in, lowering her voice. "There's a legend about a phantom hitchhiker on that stretch of road. They say he's the spirit of a young man who died in a car crash there years ago. People who pick him up report strange things, like the temperature dropping and him giving warnings about the road, and he always disappears without a trace." A chill ran down my spine. I had become part of the legend of Route 66. The encounter with the phantom hitchhiker was something I would never forget, a ghostly reminder of the dangers and mysteries that lurk along this historic highway. Over the following weeks, I couldn't shake the memory of that night. I kept thinking about the hitchhiker, wondering if there was any way to explain what I had experienced. I decided to return to the spot where he had disappeared, hoping to find some clue that might shed light on the mystery. It was another cold night when I returned to the road. I parked my car and walked to the small turnoff. The moon was full, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. As I stood there, I felt the same chill in the air. The silence was almost deafening, and I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched. I called out, "Is anyone here?" My voice echoed in the stillness. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, I heard a faint whisper, so soft I could barely make it out. "Be careful," it said. I spun around, my heart racing. There was no one there, but the voice had been real. It sounded like the hitchhiker. Determined to get to the bottom of this, I decided to spend the night in my car, parked by the side of the road. The hours passed slowly. I kept my eyes on the turnoff, waiting for any sign of the hitchhiker. Just as I was starting to doze off, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. There he was, standing by the side of the road, looking just as he had that first night. I got out of the car and approached him slowly. "Who are you?" I asked. He turned to face me, his eyes filled with sadness. "I need to warn them," he said. "I need to warn people about the curve." "How can I help you?" I asked, stepping closer. "Tell them to be careful," he whispered. "Tell them to slow down. The curve is dangerous." Before I could say anything else, he vanished again. But this time, I felt a sense of purpose. I had to help him get his message across. I spent the next few days researching, trying to find any information about a young man who had died in a car crash on that stretch of road. It wasn't easy, but eventually, I came across an old newspaper article about a fatal accident that had occurred there years ago. The young man had died when his car went off the road at the curve. I decided to share his story, hoping it would serve as a warning to others. I wrote an article about the dangers of the curve, including the legend of the phantom hitchhiker. It was published in the local paper, and soon people started talking about it. Over time, the number of accidents at the curve decreased. Drivers became more cautious, aware of the dangers and the ghostly warning. The legend of the phantom hitchhiker became more than just a story. It became a life-saving message. As I continued my journey along Route 66, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. The encounter with the phantom hitchhiker had changed me, and I knew that in some small way, I had helped make the road a little safer for others. Well, my brave souls, our journey down Route 66 has come to an end. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more true horror stories. I hope you enjoyed your terrifying tour through the haunted heartland. Remember, next time you're driving along this legendary highway, keep an eye out for ghostly hitchhikers and maybe avoid those abandoned gas stations. But hey, don't let a few restless spirits ruin your road trip. Sweet dreams, and good luck getting any sleep tonight. This is your Fearmaster, signing off.